Good evening. This is Dr. Sidney Freeman in conversation with Dr. Ty Douglas tonight. We are unpacking this whole notion of decolonizing the Black Adventist mind. On Tuesday, we had Miss Claudia Allen address that theme. And then yesterday, we had Pastor Lawrence Souffrant to address that theme. But now we have one of my best friends. I actually talk to him uh, essentially every day. And what we're going to do is just give you a taste of what our conversations are on a daily basis. So I'm excited to have my good friend and colleague, Dr. Ty Douglas from the University of Missouri at Columbia. Dr. Ty, how are you?
On, Dr. Freeman, how you doing, man? It's good to see you. You're telling everybody our secrets. People gonna wonder, they're gonna know what my secret sauce is. I get to connect with you on a regular basis, man. Thank you
Uh,
for the invitation.
oh, this is awesome, man. Could you just share just a little, give them a little taste of who you are, what you want the our audience to know about you?
Yeah, well, first of all, thank you again for having me. I believe this is a phenomenal conversation that you've been leading at a very important time. We've been engaging in these conversations long before it became vogue. I know for some folks, like being woke right now is like a thing, but many of us have been really wrestling with these topics for a bit. And I think folks who don't know me would want to know that as relates to the topic of decolonization, I've been engaged in that process for a number of years as what I call a border crossing brother, and that's just not like a cute term, based on just like identity or branding, but like literally as a black man who was born and raised in Bermuda, but has explicit family connection. My biological father is from St. Louis, so literally, like I'm like I was like Moses, like to see it, conceived in Huntsville, raised in Bermuda, and now back in the state of Missouri, where my father and his family is from. Like I'm a professor in that state, so like
Wow.
for that to happen 40 years later, in light of even the work that I do as relates to looking at black identities, but also this decolonization process, or in the work that I've looked at explicitly, this post-colonial narrative and considerations is vital as someone coming from Bermuda, a country that is still a colony of England. And so I've been raised and lived with the knowledge of explicit colonization. And so it's given me opportunity to explicitly critique it and think about how to dismantle and emerge from it. I think many people, they think that they're free. I've always been able to see some of the appendages that seek to keep us in bonds, and been able to think critically about it. And it's an ongoing process. So honored to be on. This is what I do. This is what I write about. One of my books, Border Crossing Brothers, Black Males Navigating Race, Place, and Complex Spaces, effectively really thinking about the decolonization process as I looked at Black Bermudian men who have connections across the diaspora. And many of them also have Adventist connections. Some of them were
Wow.
Adventist. And so I believe what I bring to this conversation is not just a research perspective on these issues, but a lived visceral experience of being in one part of me from an island that has, explicit connections to the continent of Africa, obviously, still connected to Europe through, a colony of England, Caribbean when we want to be, you know what I mean? And that's a whole another political conversation that we can talk about. But then also the explicit African American piece that there's a part of me that is, an American descendant of a slave, right? And my
Mhm.
grandfather who was in the military and the like. And so when I think about my journey and think about even like a Moses experience,
Mhm.
I know I was preserved for such a time as this, and to be able to be in this state at this time, the Missouri Compromise state, you know what I mean? And so I'm embedded in this work.
Wow.
Not just from a theoretical standpoint, though I have engaged in theory and have created theory. I merge post-colonial theory and border crossing theory to look at the infringement of colonialism with the liberatory commitment to get free. So that
Wow.
tension is where I live and have written about and studied for now over 12 years, right? So again,
Mhm.
this is not new. We're not talking about this because this is like like just a cool thing to talk about. Some of
Right.
us have really been wrestling and reflecting on what that has meant in our lives. And now's the time to talk explicitly about it. So I'm humbled and honored to be able to connect with you and your audience on this call tonight.
Yeah. So, uh, one of the things I think about as you were, one of the things I was thinking about as you were talking, I thought about the late Pastor Miles Monroe, who would often talk about the notion of kingdom. And he said a lot of times, because when he would come and speak in the United States, it was hard for people to understand the concept of kingdom, because our structure was not set up in that same way. And when you started talking about colonialism, I was thinking the same thing. So we've been talking about decolonizing, but could you, from your perspective, lived perspective, could you talk about or define for us what it means to be colonized?
Yeah, that's a great question. I want to just can I just first of all, I just want to pull up, I'm saying, a definition for you, just and then I want to branch from there, right? So
Okay.
to being colonized, it's right to send a group of settlers to a place and establish political control over it. Um,
Mm,
I believe it's important in that definition. It highlights the significance of place, right,
mhm.
or space. So when I talk about my book, like I said, race, place, and complex space. Like the colonization process cannot be separated from geography or geopolitics, right? That colonization is not it's not a one size fits all sort of experience, though the roots and the ugliness of it is grounded in the same thing, right? And
Right.
so
Hmm.
what it looks like in one particular jurisdiction, it will have similarities, but it may look a little bit more nuanced in another, right?
Hmm.
So, and by the way, let me just say this, Doctor. I don't know. I mean, these calls that you've been doing all week, right? I mean, I know what happened with you and Claudia. Say you got in for 40 minutes, 50. I'm not giving the people all of that. They're gonna come back on Saturday, right? So I'm gonna take. But you're winding me up, Doctor Freeman. I'm gonna tell I can hold my, hold my
Just
group.
give them a little something. Give them a
I ain't
little
giving the whole
something.
thing away, right? But man, when I looked at, for example, we're talking about place and geography, right?
Hmm.
Bermuda is a 21 square mile island, right?
Hmm.
Beautiful pink sand, blue water. And in fact, when I stream from on Saturday, God willing, I will actually. I don't know if any Bermudians are watching. I haven't even really told folks, but I'm actually going to be in Bermuda. So I don't know what my vibe is going to be like being in that colonized space, hearing about decolonization. But I'm planning to visit him and connecting, and so I'm excited to share from there. But like geography matters. In fact, like when I get back to you, let me be clear. Like you have to be careful about like sort of what you like even like I have to before I even start talking or but like I need to like go have a fish sandwich. I need to go touch the water. I need to go have a loquat. I need to talk with the people and hear like, all right, what's going on? You know what I'm saying? Like,
Hmm.
how are the people feeling? And what's the realities of what's going on? Like we have an election that's coming up because again, I'm sensitive to place
Right.
and I need to know my place, right? Even as I
Hmm.
navigate and cross borders across these colonial jurisdictions, right? And so you have to be
Wow.
careful when you just walk up like, what I'm saying? It's like walking there, it's the invisible fence where you're just running your mouth, or you're trying to just make conclusions about
Right.
people groups, and you haven't taken the time to understand the place, right? You haven't
Hmm.
taken the time to engage or to establish what I call homophily in communication, a common
Hmm.
field of interest. And so colonialization in its own way has created homophily, a common field of interest or language. And you and Claudia talked a little bit about the power of language,
Hmm.
where when you think about colonization, it gives you particular tools, the master tools that control how you think about you and what you can do and what your people can do and what you have access to,
Right.
right? And so I think it's vital that we consider the significance of place as relates to who was sent and why they were sent to establish sometimes political control. Or for me, when I think about like who were the first Adventists who came to Bermuda and what brand of Adventism did they bring?
Right.
Right? And how did that reality intersect with the unique experiences of people of African descent in that particular geopolitical space, which is different from Jamaica, similar but
Right.
different, and different from Barbados and Bahamas and South Carolina versus Sacramento. Like, so there was, and the beauty of these conversations, when you begin to connect people across the diaspora, we begin to see the similarities in what we've experienced, but we also can begin to highlight some of the peculiarities of what was unique in those spaces. So in Bermuda, you got 21 square miles. So shipbuilding was the industry. You're surrounded by water, which means there weren't a lot of plantations like for sun up to sundown picking that cotton, which means that the industry of shipbuilding also was the means by which not only money was made, but the slave owner had to be very intentional about how he engaged with his slave. Which means
Wow.
that the Black Bermudian slave, for example, had a very different slavery experience than someone who was on a plantation in another jurisdiction, which means you could begin to feel good about the fact that your master is treating you good up on the boat because he doesn't really want to mutiny, but he ain't really love you. He don't love you. He's just treating you differently because he knows he has a numerical disadvantage on that boat. So he needs to make sure that he keeps you comfortable.
Right.
And they've done that with the accoutrements of economics. Our dollar is 1-to-1, right? And we're proud of that. You talked with me, right? but also, what has been the price of our enslavement and the perception that perhaps we're off, maybe doing a little bit better than some of our other folks across the diaspora, but at the same time, we're still being held captive by those same oppressive tentacles. So I believe it's important when we think about colonialism, Dr. Freeman. Again, place is vital, but then it talks about the establishment of political control. It also says to come to settle among and establish political control, a place or domain for one's own use, right? So again, you're talking about the prerogative of individuals who have some level of power to decide how a particular space will be occupied, utilized, monetized, and marginalized, right? And so I believe those are some of the roots of colonialism that impact all the colonies that we've been a part of. And I want to make sure that we get that out there, because sometimes some of us on these bigger islands forget that these are plantations as well that we need to be free from.
Yeah. So could you talk about what a decolonization process would look like? You don't have to give all of it. 'Cause I know you're going to save some for Sabbath, but could you just talk a little bit about what that process might start out with?
Yeah, so I think that we have to begin with the acknowledgement that we've all been infringed upon by colonialism. I know some people would suggest. I've heard people say, "Well, I don't have a need to be decolonized. I'm good." I think that's actually a sign that one needs to be. That's the okie doke, right? That's the okie doke, because if you begin to look at it's in the water. You know what I'm saying? It's the oxygen that we breathe or have breathed if you're in particular spaces. And so I think part of the process is to really consider the fact that we've all been impacted, and to be willing to sit with that, and then to be willing to unlearn, for that to be exposed, and then to be willing to unlearn some of the trappings and traces of how we've come to disassociate and distance ourselves from our own colonialization, right? Because it's one thing to be oppressed; it's another thing to not know that you don't know. You know what I'm saying? Or
Right.
you don't know that you don't know that you don't know, right? So it's levels to it. And so I think there's a humility that we all must have. And if you're Adventist, it was a product that was produced out of a white supremacist, Eurocentric context. And so if you've drank any of that Kool-Aid, then certainly you need to make sure you check to see how that's affected, your blood sugar level.
So, to that point, there was introduced the idea of this notion of sovereignty, and what I'm finding is that there are a couple camps out there. There's one camp that is more what I'm calling integrationist, more bridge builder approach, and then you have one that's more kind of nationalistic, that's saying we must be sovereign, we must have some type of movement, even a denomination. Some are saying. Could you talk about when you hear that? What is your thinking? Can both coexist, or do you need to choose one? Kind of give us your initial gut thoughts about that.
All right. So again, I want to just pull up a definition. Again, homophilia, I want to just give us some tools for those who will follow the conversation even next week. So when we talk about sovereignty, you're talking about supreme power of authority, right? A self-governing state, the authority of a state to govern itself or another state. And so I think that's important because sometimes we use terms and we're not really sure what we're talking about. So I think it's an ongoing conversation that is important. I think it's a beautiful thing when people, especially Black people, begin to reflect on, what does it look like for us to be lenders and not borrowers, to embrace our birthright. As the Garden of Eden was in Africa. You know what I mean? Like to really reflect on, the fact that God has given us agency, and while many of us have been served up particular dishes of Eurocentrism and colonialization, whether it be through our schooling system, our religious experiences, etc. I believe it's valid that we begin to imagine what it could look like to be free from that. I believe that's the beauty of the decolonization process. That also includes conversations around sovereignty. I'm a guy. See, to be honest with you, like I'm thinking about these conversations on multiple levels, like the macro, the meso, and the micro, right? And so I believe that we all have different roles to play. There was king, there was axe, there's, what I'm saying, there's different approaches, and I believe that we need all of them. So I believe there's a lot of nuance and details that need to be figured out as relates to what that would potentially look like. Like others have mentioned, I'm not sure if that's like the silver bullet, the fix all. And I wonder, how much time do we have to try to create, as just a denomination piece? That's what I mean. But
Right.
On a macro level. But I believe that if each of us, if we're all the church, what I'm saying, like, I mean, right now, we're not even sure if we're gonna be able to get back to buildings anytime soon. Right? So is sovereignty us creating this mega sort of monstrosity that replicates what we've trying to come from? Or is sovereignty each of us embracing the fact that we are all the church, and now we have sovereignty over how we actually think about our ministry work, not just within the confines of our denomination, but our economics, creating nonprofits, and being able to do ministry work in the local context in a way that the larger organizational structure is not doing very well. And so, when we ask about sovereignty, to what end? And if the end is local and more smaller touch and impact in that regard, I believe there's definitely a both and. So I'm open to the conversation. I don't believe that my responsibility or call is to try to build another denominational structure. That I don't believe that's my call. Now, I may be able to play a role as a thought leader and participate, but I'm actually at a place where, for me, sovereignty is taking control over, what I'm saying, man, I'm enjoying the sovereignty that I've experienced in this COVID context.
Wow.
Of not having to preach every week or not having to put on a program, and we begin to think about, like what does it look like to even shift our time as pastoral leaders, whether you be full-time or lay, what I'm saying, where you're not just spending 20 hours a week preparing a sermon to talk to 20 or 200 people, but now you're thinking about how do you mobilize the laity to share that work more intentionally and dividing the labor across the larger demographics of the pastoral context, nationally and internationally. Like that's a different way of thinking about it. So for me, the thought of sovereignty and even the language of it is vital, because it says, I don't care what the oppressor thinks. That's important.
Right.
And when I say oppressor, I'm not talking about just white supremacy, but ultimately the author of that, which is Satan, right? And so what does it look like to emancipate yourself from mental slavery? No words about Molly, right?
Yeah.
But or to be transformed by the renewing of your mind, as you shared as a fundamental text for these conversations, right? For our minds to be renewed, where we can even imagine. And that will require greater imagination than just creating a black version of our whiteness that we have right now. Because if not, that's not sovereignty. That's just replication. That's duplication. And that's a waste of time, in my opinion. So I think there's a both and. I think we need individuals who are thinking about it on a macro level. I think every single person on the sound of our voices needs to be thinking about, what does that look like in your finances? Are you a lender and not a borrower? Do you have a nonprofit where you can also tap into people who don't want to give to your church, but they'll give to your community organization? That's sovereignty. What does it look like to connect the dots across the diaspora? And that's what I believe how I'm called to do as a border crossing brother, as a professor, as a pastor of a church plant in a city that did not have a black church when I first moved here, and have navigated the state versus regional context and seen and had questions across the whole context of that, right?
Yeah,
So
yeah.
I'm not under any illusions that moving and having our own is going to eliminate all the issues. Nor am I also at a place where I'm saying that to imagine or even to talk about that or to even work towards that is not appropriate. It just might not be appropriate for me based
Right.
on what God has called me to do at this time.
Wow. To our audience, you see that this is going to be an interesting and robust conversation. We've had different distinct personalities over the last 3 days, and we want to thank Dr. Douglas for taking time before he flies out to the beautiful country of Bermuda,
Yeah.
taking time out to speak to our audience. I want to just remind our audience that tomorrow at the same time, 6 o'clock Eastern Standard Time, we'll have Pastor Michelle Moda to be speaking with us, particularly from the Afro Latinx perspective regarding decolonizing our minds. Additionally, we'll have on Sabbath, this upcoming Sabbath, the 12th, at 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, we'll have the full group, including and adding on Pastor Jeremiah Sopolin, to talk about the notion of decolonizing the Black Adventist mind. I would encourage you to, if you want to get access to that, please subscribe to my Facebook page, and you can see that there on the flyer, Sidney Freeman Jr. There. And then also another way you can watch it is through my YouTube page, Sidney Freeman Jr. Please subscribe to the YouTube page and like the Facebook page. If you're on the Facebook page, you'll be getting new information. I'm dropping videos and other resources throughout the week. So have a wonderful evening. Thank you for being with us. Have a blessed evening.